So welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to complete the final review. The plan here is to cover chapters 8 through 16, which is what the final will be on. Okay. All right, so let's get started. All right, just to refresh your memory, so we began the course by formally defining what management is. So we'll just quickly review that. So we define management as the pursuit of organizational goals efficiently and effectively. Another popular way in which management is defined is using this definition, the art of getting things done through people, which I think is an eloquent way of describing what the management process is. And of course, it highlights here the importance of working with people. And then the whole process of management was divided into these four functions: planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. And so here, the four functions are displayed in this graphic. And of course, the first, let me get my pointer. There we go. So for the first half of the semester, which the midterm covered, was this first section of the management process, which was planning. And here we just talked about how the organization creates a plan about what it wants to achieve, the objectives that it is pursuing. And so now we are beginning in this next section, organizing, right? So we have goals that we want to pursue. Now we got to organize the tasks, people, and other resources to accomplish those goals. So chapter 8, we covered culture and structure. And culture is just the shared values, the rituals that the organization performs, symbols, norms, beliefs, etc., that create a company identity, a personality. And this personality is enforced through a socialization process. And this drives assumptions about how work gets done. And the assumptions that are driven are things like what's appropriate for dressing for work, whether the dress is more formal or more informal, work times, right? So what time are you expected to show up for work, right? And these are sort of the unwritten rules of the way the organization is run. So it may be formally prescribed that you have to show up at 9 and that you leave at 5, let's say, but the rest, the entire office is maybe showing up earlier, maybe leaving work later, right? This is part of the culture that defines how that organization operates and sort of what the work times are, what the expectations are. Things like risk tolerance, right? So a lot of these tech companies, these tech startups, Silicon Valley type companies, they have a very high tolerance for risk. So within that culture, it's expected that you're going to try things that may have a low chance of working, right? So there may be lots of failures, and those failures are okay, but you may work in other organizations that are very conservative. Perhaps they need to be, maybe they work within, let's say, a healthcare setting where you don't want to take a lot of risks with patient health. So they take a more conservative approach where errors and failure are maybe to be avoided at all costs. Things like the formality of meetings, all of this is generated, right, by the company's culture. Culture is important because culture drives attitudes and behaviors of the people that work within an organization. And we will specifically define what attitudes and behaviors are, but they're very important. These are aspects of the organization that are important to monitor and track and manage for, right? Behaviors are things like the actual performance of employees. Now, the reason why culture has such an effect on attitudes and behaviors is because of this socialization process. This is the way everyone within the organization sort of behaves, right? And so people have this natural desire to want to fit into a group. And because you want to fit in, you're going to go along with sort of the norms that have been established within that organization. So it has a powerful, culture has a very powerful motivated effect on behaviors, right? And I illustrated that when we covered this chapter in a very dramatic way by showing what effect a cult has on its members. And I talked about the Jim Jones cult. So now culture is going to interact with structure. It's going to have an effect on structure, and the structure is going to have an effect on culture. And ultimately, they will combine to have an effect on the members of the organization's attitudes and behaviors. And so I'm going to highlight just a couple of ways in which organizations would be structured that you will likely run into. There are lots of other ways in which you can structure an organization, but I'll talk about a few here, right? So one way you can structure an organization is by who benefits from that organization. And so a for-profit structure is the most typical, right? And so these are companies like Tesla or Google, right? And here the goal for the organization is to generate a profit. And a profit is just, if you take all the revenue that the organization generates and you subtract out all of the expenses it pays, whatever money is left over, that is the organization's profit. That money is then pocketed, by the owners of the company. And so the goal here is to sort of maximize that profit, maximize the wealth for the owners of the company. A nonprofit, its goal is to deliver a service, to deliver some kind of service. And the profits that are used, whatever profits are generated, are used for that purpose, right? And so charities or nonprofit organizations, colleges are typically nonprofits. So Baruch College is a nonprofit organization. And so for these types of organizations, they may actually generate a profit, right? And you want to be efficient, right? So you want to, increase the revenue you generate. You want to, so you want to be effective. You want to maximize the revenue you're able to generate for your organization. You're also going to want to minimize your expenses, right? And so that's going to leave over a profit, right? So nonprofits do generate profits. But what makes them a nonprofit is what they do with those profits. Those profits are not pocketed by the owners of the organization. Those profits are going to be used to deliver whatever services that nonprofit was established to deliver. A mutual benefit organization is another type of organization, and their goal is to advance the interests of its members. And a good example of this would be a labor union, right? And so now, just like a nonprofit, whatever resources the organization obtains, it's going to be used to serve the interest of members. But the key here is that it's about its members, right? And so a union is not serving the interest of all workers. A union is serving the interests of workers who are members of that union. So that's one way in which you will structure an organization. Another way in which you'll structure an organization is by who has power over whom, right? This sort of hierarchical structure or lack of a hierarchical structure. Now, there's lots of ways in which you can organize power within an organization. And the textbook went through lots of examples. I'll highlight three here. These are the three most common that you are going to encounter. And so one way of structuring an organization is just through a simple structure, right? Where this is going to be a very small organization, a mom and pop organization, maybe like something like a plumber, right? Who owns their own business. And here you'll just have the owner of the company and then maybe some sort of administrative assistant or some kind of helper. Maybe someone who helps like with the bookkeeping or something like that. That's a simple structure. As an organization grows, right, you're going to need a little bit more of a complex structure. Here's an example of one that is typically found within organizations, and that is a functional structure. And here, all of the employees are grouped according to function. Functions are things like finance, marketing, IT, right? And so all of the finance workers will work together, and there will be some sort of head of that group, right? So there'll be like a VP of finance that oversees all of the finance workers, a VP of marketing that oversees all of the marketing workers, et cetera. And then another way is to organize the company by divisions. And there are different ways in which you can organize by division. One would be grouping employees by product division. And so Time Warner is a company that offers lots of different kinds of products. They offer both music and movies, right? And so they may organize their organization according to those different product lines. And so all of the employees that work on the music product will be grouped together, right? And there'll be some sort of, division head of music. And then all of the employees that work on movies will be grouped together. And then there will be a head of movies. So that's one way of organizing employees according to a divisional structure. You can also do it by geography, right? Where you organize workers according to where they are located, right? And so you may have a North American operations, and then so someone is the head of North America, and all of the employees are grouped together within North America. And then you may have like a European operation, and so all of those employees are grouped together with a head of European operations. And so again, and the point here is that your structure is going to influence your culture, right? A for-profit organization that's concerned with wealth maximization is going to have a different kind of culture than a nonprofit who's, looking to rescue animals, right? They're going to have a very different kind of culture. So structure affects culture, culture is going to affect structure. And both of these are very important because they combine to affect employee attitudes and behaviors, right? So it's going to have a direct effect on how employees perform. Okay, so that does it for Chapter 8. Chapter 9, we moved into human resource management. And this is the main idea here. This is all about planning for, attracting, developing, and retaining an effective workforce. Okay, so you've constructed these plans. You've created the infrastructure for an organization. In order to carry out the plan, you need to hire workers, and that's what this section is all about. Strategic human resource management, though, highlights the importance of people in an organization, and it makes the claim that people are an organization's most important resource, right? And so technology, the advanced machinery that's deployed in all of these very sophisticated factories, get a lot of hype and attention. And they're certainly important. Technology is obviously very, very important. But this gets at the claim that, in fact, the most important resource that an organization has is its people. The reason why an organization is going to succeed or fail is going to be based on the capabilities of its people. Its people will give it a strategic advantage over the competition. And so to highlight that importance, there are a couple of terms that you should know. One is human capital, and human capital is the term used to describe the economic and productive potential of employees, and that potential comes from the knowledge that the employees have, the experience that they have, and the actions that they take, right? And so, again, your productive capacity, how well you do producing whatever good and service you're in the business of producing, is going to depend on your human capital. It's going to depend on the workforce that you have recruited. Social capital is the economic and productive potential of strong, trust, and cooperative relationships. And so here, so human beings, right, are social creatures, right? And economic activity is a cooperative enterprise, right? People, production happens through this sort of collective experience. And so social capital is really highlighting the quality of the relationships that are established within an organization. And it highlights the importance that relationships have on the productive process. And so again, if you want to gain a strategic advantage over your competition, if you want to maximize the effectiveness of your organization, it's imperative that the members of that organization have these strong, trust, and cooperative relationships. And so social capital is sort of a measure of those relationships. Okay, so in order to get the work done that needs to get done within your organization, obviously you need to recruit workers. And so recruiting is just locating and attracting qualified applicants for the jobs that are open within your organization. And selection is identifying among those people who are the highest performers. And I'll highlight this statistic, which is that 5% of the workforce produces 26% of your output. And so this was generated, these statistics were generated from a, so these statistics were generated from a survey of many, many, many organizations. Right? And so this might be typical among many companies, right? That a large part of what the company is able to accomplish really happens from a small minority of its employees, right? Which means they're not getting a lot of performance out of a lot of their employees. So it's crucial that you select the highest performers. You want to seek out who those 5%ers are. And so that's the goal of recruitment and selection. And then another thing, lastly here, compensation, and we'll talk more about this in the motivation section, but compensation is obviously part of the human resource management process. And here they just talked about how compensation is made up of many different parts, right? And so there's the base pay, which most people cite when they talk about how much money they are paid, which is their salary or wage. But in addition to that, workers are typically paid incentives, which could be like a year-end bonus or a profit sharing plan, as well as benefits, things like health insurance. In our country, in the United States, most workers get their health insurance from their employees, which is sort of like a unique structure within the world. And those benefits are expensive. And so these incentives and benefits make up a significant portion of the overall compensation that workers receive. Okay, so you've recruited a number of workers to your organization. Now what you need to do is go through a process of orientation. That's really just helping them smoothly enter into the job, learn about the organization, learn their job routine, what the mission of the organization is, right? What the rules of the organization are, and develop any necessary skills that they may be missing, right? And so that's the very first step that you're going to take with these newly recruited employees. You want to orient them to your organization and to their new job. But considering that your employees are your most valued and important resource, you want to put effort and resources into making sure you develop them, right? And so this is really just about making sure you are maximizing the capabilities of your organization by putting employees through this sort of development process where they have an opportunity to continually increase their capabilities, their skills, etc. And the way you're going to do that is through a process of coaching, right? So senior, more experienced employees will coach the junior employees about how to more effectively do their job and accomplish their tasks. But then there will be more sort of formal training programs. Job rotation is another way in which you can develop employees, and this is just where employees will do many different kinds of jobs within the organization to expose them to different functions that workers there perform. And then there might even be offsite classes, so more of a formal sort of educational experience where they attend classes on different subjects. You want this to be, though, a continuous, ongoing process, right? You want to commit to continually developing your employees, right? Because you always want to be maximizing your organization's capabilities, and you do that by maximizing the capabilities of your employees. You don't want to stay static because the competition is not going to stay static, right? And again, humans, your employees are your most important resource, so you want to make the proper investment in that. And then the last part of this chapter talks about performance management. And here, this is really just about defining, monitoring, measuring, and evaluating how well your employees perform, right? And then providing consequences for that performance. And this is probably the most important aspect of this, because it has such a large effect on outcomes, right? So putting a performance management system in place where essentially what you're doing is you're defining goals for performance goals for each of the employees, right? And then you want to regularly evaluate and monitor whether they're achieving those goals and whether they are on pace to achieving them. And so that process really has an enormous impact on their overall performance. A performance appraisal is the actual formal part of this process where you actually evaluate the employee performance. And the key to an effective performance appraisal, and you might have some organizations have them formal ones yearly, you may have them every 6 months. I mean, you want to be regularly monitoring and evaluating employees on a regular basis, but these more formal performance appraisals may happen less frequently. The key, though, to make them effective, because a lot of companies have abandoned these appraisals because employees see them as just them being criticized, right? And so managers will just talk about all of the things that they're doing wrong. That's not an effective way to do one of these performance appraisals. They're only effective if you give effective feedback, right? And so there's an approach to being more effective in your feedback. And the way you do that is really taking a coaching sort of orientation, right? So you're there really to work with the employee to maximize, their abilities. And so you want to avoid criticism. You want to get the employee's feedback on how they think that they are doing, and then you want to work with them the way a coach would work with someone the way a coach would work with an athlete in figuring out, where it is that they want to go and what you can do to support them so that they can get there. And so if you take that sort of approach, that's how you can make these performance appraisals more effective. Okay, moving on. So creativity, innovation, and change. And in this chapter, right, I reveal the secret to writing music hits. So creativity, what is creativity? Creativity was defined formally as producing ideas which are novel and useful. And so the two key features that make an idea creative is that they're novel, right? Which means that they're new, they're different. No one else has thought of this before. And they're also useful. And the process, the secret process for being creative is this process called bricolage. And bricolage is just combining whatever existing resources you have at hand, combining them in new ways, and then maybe add in some variation. And this is, a lot of people, when you talk to people about being creative, it's hard for them to sort of articulate the process that they use to be creative, right? So people often rely on intuition, this non-rational approach to being creative. Bricolage is a rational approach to creativity. We can understand what the creative process is, and really it's just about combining elements in new ways, existing elements. And so I illustrated this using a music example, right? And so if you want to write hit songs, the way you do that is you listen to existing hit songs, right? High quality songs, and you look for elements of those songs that you find most appealing. It may be the beat, it may be a melody, right? It may be a particular instrument sound, right? You take note of those. Those are the resources that you are going to make use of, right? And so you can sort of build an inventory of these resources that you have access to. And in one song, it might be the melody that you like. In another song, it may be the chord change. And then if you want to write your own hit song, you combine these elements in a new way, right? And so the song will likely be a very good song because you're making use of elements that are already proven to be effective. You are using the most high quality elements because you're drawing these elements from songs that are of high quality themselves. And so you combine it together to produce a new song, and that's how the creative process is done. Now, in a business context, one example, I talked about Starbucks, right? And so he was roaming the streets of Italy when he saw what was happening with these little shops, and he thought that this might be a good idea in the US. And so he borrowed some of those ideas from Italy, just his experiences traveling through Italy, and creating his own chain of, retail shops. And then, but he borrowed ideas from lots of other different places, right? And so now when you walk into a Starbucks, there's a whole experience that the owner crafted that is generated. And this combines not just sort of this cafe type environment that he saw in Italy, but he's now also controlling the what you smell when you walk in there, right? That's a very sort of deliberate process. They have deliberate control over exactly what you smell when you walk in there. So they're very particular about what they're cooking, right? Because they don't want to ruin the coffee smell that they're trying to generate. Also, there's a particular kind of music that you hear when you walk in there, and that creates an environment that's very effective in selling coffee. Now, all right, so Starbucks made use of smells and sounds to generate a particular experience that was effective for his organization. Now, a creative approach might be saying, okay, how can I borrow from that, right? This idea that I want to control smells and sounds to generate some kind of outcome. perhaps maybe you can use that in an office setting, right? What would it mean, right, to maybe have particular sense within an office that could maybe prompt greater levels of productivity, right? Maybe have a particular music playing within the office to increase performance. And in fact, this has been shown that if you play happy music, it will make employees happier, and this sort of positive attitude that's generated, this positive affect actually improves performance, right? And so you're borrowing this idea that was used in retail to generate more coffee sales, right? And you combine it in a new way and applying it within an office setting. That's the process of being creative. So if you want to be more creative, generally what you want is you want to expose yourself to new experiences, and with these experiences, consider their alternative use. All right, so innovation. Innovation is just the successful implementation of creative ideas within an organization. This is important because innovation is a source of strategic advantage. And so this section on change highlights the fact that we live in an ever-changing world. If you are static, right, if you continually do what you've always done in the past and never update what you're doing, you will be left behind, right? So the continually changing world and environment necessitates organizations to continually change, right? So innovation is a way of doing that. It's a way of continually changing, adapting to the ever-changing environment. It's a way of effectively solving all of the problems that are presented when you're conducting business. One of the challenges, though, is not only being innovative, but then the resistance that the existing organization will have to these changes. And so the resistance is something that you need to manage for. And the way you do that is by establishing trust within your employees that this is a necessary change that needs to be made and that it will be beneficial. Okay, so that wraps up chapter 10. And that wraps up the organizing section. Okay, so here we move on to the leading section, right? So now all of the people are in place, right? They're going to be working on the tasks necessary in order to accomplish and achieve the objectives set out in your plans. Now the next step is to lead the organization, to motivate and direct them so that they put in the work necessary to achieve the objectives. So chapter 11, managing individual differences. And so here we talk about how people are going to be, they're different, right? People vary. And within this chapter, we talked about the important ways in which people vary and how that will impact how they perform. So one way that people will vary is in their personality, right? And so what we talked about here, what's important is that there's no such thing as a personality type. What researchers have found is that personalities, which by the way are these, as you recall, these stable psychological traits and behavioral attributes that give a person his or her identity. So the key feature here is stability. These are things that are resistant to change, that they are unlikely to change, and they will often stay with a person their entire lives. And what researchers have found is that people typically vary along these 5 dimensions here. They're known as the Big 5, and you can remember them through the OCEAN acronym. And the 5 ways in which people's traits, personality traits vary is in their openness to experience. And so this is, intellectual curiosity, intelligence, things like this. Conscientiousness, which is a person's responsibility, the effort that they put in to achieve something. Conscientiousness is one of the most important personality dimensions, because this is most correlated with performance. That's something that you need to know. So you want to consider the degree of conscientiousness that a person has, because that will tell you a lot about what you need to know about whether they're going to be an effective employee or not. Extroversion, right? This is whether someone's outgoing or not. Agreeableness, this is how easy these people get along with others. And then neuroticism, which is their ability to control their emotions. And so these are the 5 dimensions along which people vary. This is what the research suggests. There's an enormous amount of research to validate these 5 categories. And the way people are along each of these 5 dimensions is the way they will largely likely to be for most of their lives. What you need to know out of these is that conscientiousness is most correlated with employee performance. Another way in which people differ is their core self-evaluation. And core self-evaluation, of course, is another feature of a person that impacts performance. And their core self-evaluation is just their persistent beliefs about their capacities and their ability to sort of successfully operate in the world. And there's 4 aspects that make up a person's core self-evaluation. There's self-efficacy, what they think about their abilities, self-esteem, whether they like themselves or not, locus of control, which is whether they believe they have control over the events that happen in their life or not, and emotional stability, right? And emotional stability is the opposite end of neuroticism. So a person who has a lot of emotional stability, have control over their emotions, is not neurotic. And then lastly here is emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is your ability to monitor your feelings, the ability to monitor other person's feelings, and then to use this information to guide your own thinking and action. So it's just this sort of ability and intelligence that you have to read your own emotions, to read the emotions of others, and then use that information to inform how you should behave. And it's been shown that this certainly has a positive effect, not only on your own well-being, so a high degree of emotional intelligence will improve your own well-being, but it'll also improve your performance, right? Because it better enables you to sort of negotiate the complexities of establishing high-quality relationships with people. So it definitely has an effect. It's something that's important, but it may not live up to the hype of a lot of its advocates. Emotional intelligence is all the rage among lots of circles within business. And so this is certainly something you'll probably hear a lot about. Okay, so all of these, here we go. All of these differences are important because it's going to impact those employees' attitudes and their behaviors. And so an attitude is a learned predisposition toward a given object. And attitudes are important because this is going to directly influence your behavior, and behaviors are important. That's ultimately what's going to determine the outcomes in your organization. So an example of an attitude would be job satisfaction, right? So how you feel about your job, whether you like it or not, whether you're satisfied with it or not, it's an attitude, because that's a disposition that you have, not in general, not whether you're generally happy or sad, but whether you're happy with your job, right? So it's directed toward a particular object. And so these are the things that you're going to want to monitor and track, these attitudes, things like employee engagement, right? And so how involved are they in their job, how engaged they are with in their job, how satisfied they are with their job, how committed they are to the organization. These are important attitudes to track and manage for. And the reason why you want to do that is obviously because their attitudes are going to affect their behaviors. And behaviors are things like performance, productivity, right? How well they're able to complete their tasks in their job, absenteeism, right? Whether they're calling in sick to work, turnover, right? So if they're quitting, if a lot of your employees are quitting, that is turnover. Organizational citizenship behaviors. This is where you're sort of a good citizen. You're a good organizational citizen, which is to say that you go above and beyond what the requirements of your job is, right? You may not be required to sort of help the newly entering employees to your organization, but you do it anyways, right? That's an example of organizational citizenship behaviors. Counterproductive work behaviors would be the opposite, right? If a person, creates a lot of drama and conflict in an organization, unnecessary, conflict, perhaps they're abusive, maybe they steal from the organization. These are examples of counterproductive work behaviors. And of course, attitudes affect behaviors. If you have very low job satisfaction, you're less likely to engage in citizenship behaviors. You're more likely to engage in counterproductive work behaviors. And then lastly, what this chapter talked about along differences among individuals within the organization is this concept of diversity. And diversity is really just about differences and similarities in age, gender, race, religion, ethnicity. There's lots of different categories along which people are going to vary. This is important because the United States is becoming a lot more diverse country, right? And so the diversity of the country is going to reflect the diversity, or your organization is going to reflect the diversity of the country. So that means organizations are going to become more diverse. And so you need to manage for that. And part of that is recognizing and understanding the benefits that diversity brings, right? So diversity is something that an organization should embrace. And of course, diversity means that people are going to have different kinds of backgrounds. They're going to be exposed to different kinds of experiences. This is an opportunity to draw from a lot more resources at hand so that you can be more creative, right? And so diverse organizations have shown a greater ability to solve problems, a greater ability to be creative, right? Because you're drawing from a more diverse set of experiences. So that's the benefit of diversity. But all of those diverse experiences may lead to conflict. And so you need to manage for that. There's also natural barriers to diversity, which organizations need to overcome. In particular, some of the barriers that are presented to minority racial groups. And we talked a little bit about this when we covered this chapter. The NFL has a system in place called the Rooney Rule, which specifically addresses the barrier to increasing the diversity among its most important positions, head coaching and general manager. And so they put in this rule, which requires organizations to interview minority candidates for those roles in order to overcome some of these sort of natural barriers that exist in giving minority groups opportunities. Okay, so that does it for chapter 11. Moving on to chapter 12, motivation, right? So now, you've recruited all of these workers. We understand that people are different and we need to account for those differences. Now we got to motivate them to actually work. And I began this chapter by talking about the purpose of life. And I think that this is important because it really sets up really what motivation is all about. And so what I went through is the fact that we are in this historical period called modernity, which gave us a scientific way of understanding the world. This scientific way of understanding the world overturned the superstitious and religious ways of understanding the world. And not only did it overturn that approach to understanding the world, it also overturned the meaning and purpose that these organizations provided, right? And the reason why is because there was no scientific evidence to support their claims that this is, the purpose for humans, living on this planet. And this presented a problem, right? And so the problem was that we are born into a world as human beings, we naturally are inclined to want to lead a meaningful life, a purposeful life. But we've now come to recognize that the world is devoid of meaning. And so now what do you do about it, right? And so the one philosopher, Albert Camus, posed this very provocative question, well, should we commit suicide? And the answer to that question that he came to was, no, you shouldn't. This is actually a good thing that we are not provided with meaning in the universe, that we are not part of some divine plan established by someone else. And so now this gives us the opportunity to freely decide what our purpose is for ourselves, right? Now we can decide what that purpose is. And so what I suggested is that what the purpose of your life is to maximize positive experiences. But since you have the freedom, right, to decide, what's important in your life, what those positive experiences are going to vary between people. So this purpose to your life of maximizing positive experiences is really going to underlie everything that you do, right? It's going to be the sort of base motivating force that gets you to do everything that you do. It's what gets you up in bed in the morning. It's what gets you to, show up to class, to put in the effort, to do well in your class, etc. So it provides sort of that base form of motivation. And motivation is the psychological processes here defined formally that arouse and direct goal-directed behavior, right? It's the reason why you do anything. And as I suggested, we are motivated to maximize our positive experiences and minimize the negative ones. Now, so that means, to motivate employees, your job must generate these positive experiences, right? Because then that will provide sort of the psychological energy to want to do their tasks and to do them well. And employees, of course, must be motivated to maximize their performance so that the organization has the greatest chance of achieving its planned objectives. So motivation is important. You want to create an environment that generates these positive experiences so employees are motivated to work and that they're motivated to work hard. And that's the way you're going to maximize performance within your organization. So I had mentioned, all right, so then that leaves the question, what are these positive experiences? And within the motivation chapter, they had mentioned several motivation theories that generate motivation among employees. And there's lots of them. There's this issue of proliferation within the motivation literature, and the number of different motivation theories is sort of getting out of hand. So one way of making sense of this is just to organize all of these theories within these three buckets. And so what I suggested is that there are three ways in which we experience reality: psychologically, which is your cognitive and emotional experiences, right? So thinking and feeling. There are social experiences, and then there are behavioral and physical experiences. So this is all the ways in which we experience reality. And you can divide all of those experiences up into these three buckets. And so then what you would do then in order to motivate someone is to provide positive experiences within each of these sort of three buckets. And you can draw from motivation theories as ideas for ways of producing these positive experiences. So there's lots of ways that you can do this. You don't need to memorize, a list of all the different ways that you should do this, but I'll just give you a few examples, right? And so one way of producing a positive psychological experience is giving workers an opportunity to increase their competence, right? So to improve at their skills in whatever jobs that they're performing. To grant them autonomy. Autonomy is their ability to make decisions about how they do their job, right? This generates positive psychological experiences in people. So it'll be a motivating force. Socially, right? You want high quality relationships within your organization. Grant people status, right? So people want to feel that they're respected among their peers. Recognition. Some people derive positive experiences from having power. So giving people responsibility. And also equity and justice. We talk a lot about equity and justice. That you want to make sure that people are treated fairly. That's the key. Fair treatment will lead to a positive social experience. People want to experience that, so it will be a motivating force. And then lastly, the behavioral category, things like safety, right? You don't want people to get hurt. You don't want people to experience pain when they go to work. Using their abilities to the fullest and achievement are examples of generating positive experiences within this category. So compensation is obviously another important motivating force. Compensation you can think of as sort of like this universal positive experience generator. And the reason why is because when you pay someone, you don't have to figure out what it is that they derive positive experiences from. You just give them the money and then they will spend that money on positive experiences for themselves, right? So it's sort of this universal positive experience generator. So obviously compensation is a motivating force. So that does it for chapter 12 on motivation. Moving right along to teams. Teams are important because organizations are largely now grouped into teams. So there's a very good chance that you are going to work within a team. And a team here was defined as something different than just a mere group. A team is a group of people that work together on a common goal. Whereas a group would just be a collection of people performing as individuals. Here, teams, it's more collaborative, and they're working together on a common goal. And what you need to figure out, since a lot of people are going to be working within teams, is how do you make teams more effective? And so we talked a little bit about that. Google did a study, since Google is organized into teams. They did a study to figure out what is it that makes some teams high performing. And what they found was that there's sort of a couple of features that turn teams into these high performing groups. And that is, you want to give everyone equal speaking time. And when other people are speaking, you want to engage in active listening, right? And so the equal speaking time is just a way of making sure every member of the team feels that they are valued, right? That feels that they are on equal standing, and that they are sort of an equal member of that team, right? And you accomplish that by making sure everyone has a say when you conduct your meetings. And then when people are talking, you want to engage in active listening, right? And active listening means you're not going to, out of hand, dismiss what they say. It means you're going to listen to what they're saying. You're going to make an effort to understand what it is that they're saying. Even if you disagree, you want to go into it with a non-judgmental attitude. You want to go into that conversation with the attitude that they are probably going to reveal something to you that perhaps you might have been missing, right? So you're going to learn something new. And that's a way that you're able to build effective teams. The research, the academic research supports that. There are other ways to build teams. An example here, creating an environment of collaboration, right? So people are working together and everyone knows what each member's role is. Trust, right? So you can rely and trust that what the people are saying is accurately represents what they're doing. Performance goals, and so again, this applies to all employees, right? People need to, if you want to maximize performance, you need to set goals and check that everyone is on pace to achieving them. Motivation through mutual accountability, the idea that we're all in this sort of together, right? And so my performance is going to affect other performance is a motivating force. You know, I don't want to let my team down, right? So I'm going to work harder on my task. And then diversity, right? Diversity, we covered a couple of chapters ago. That's brings a benefit to the team, right? It'll make the team better at solving problems, more creative, more innovative, but that's obviously something you need to manage for. There is a theory that describes stages which teams go through. Not every team will go through, you know, these 5 sort of stages in its development process, but it sort of roughly describes what a lot of teams will go through. So I'll just name these. This is a popular model that people refer to. So Tuckman's 5-stage model, the 5 stages are forming, which is at the very beginning of the process when people first get to know each other. Storming, this is where conflicts emerge. People have different ideas about what goals you should be pursuing, how those goals are going to be realized, right? How tasks should be performed. The Norman stage is when these conflicts are eventually resolved. People come together, everyone is on board with what you're trying to achieve and how to achieve it. The performance stage then after the Norman stage is where you are maximizing your performance. Everyone's completing their tasks. And the adjoining stage is at the very end when the team comes to a conclusion and they are about to disband. And in this stage, what you want to do is you want to highlight what you've done good and what you've done bad. Within teams, you want to manage conflict. Conflict is a part of teams. Conflict is typically thought of as something that is bad, that is dysfunctional, but there's a functional form of conflict that is good. And an example of a functional form of conflict would be playing devil's advocate. This is something you want to manage for, right? And so you want to sort of introduce conflict at the right stage, right? So during that storming stage in team development, it's good to have conflict because when you play devil's advocate, right, you're going to expose the team to ideas, alternatives that perhaps they may not consider, right? And so you want to make sure that you are pursuing the best course and considering from a huge range of alternatives. And that's sort of the benefit that conflict provides. But you need to properly handle conflict, right? Because you don't want it to turn to becoming dysfunctional. And the ways in which you make conflict functional is by maintaining openness, right? And so you need to create sort of this safe space where people are allowed to voice their ideas. You want to give equal standing to everyone within the team. Empathy goes a long way in all relationships, particularly relationships that are currently engaged in conflict. You want to be supportive, right? So you want to encourage people to voice alternative ideas, and you want to keep a positive attitude. Okay, moving right along, chapter 14, leadership. So leadership is just the ability to influence employees to pursue organizational goals, but you are influencing them on a voluntary basis, right? So you're getting them to do things voluntarily. You are not ordering them to do something because you have power as a manager. So that's what leadership is all about. The effectiveness of leaders depends on two things. It depends on their traits, and we talked about traits of personality, and it depends on their behaviors. Now, since behaviors actually have a bigger impact on how effective you are as a leader, it has a bigger impact than traits. And since behaviors are much easier to change than traits, what this means is that leadership is actually something that can be learned. You may not be able to change your traits much, but you are able to change your behaviors. And since behaviors really have the bigger impact on your ability to lead, it means that you can actually learn these behaviors and become a more effective leader. But let's look at each of these separately. So leadership traits. So here are positive traits that people will possess that will improve their leadership abilities. And we can go back to the big five personality traits, right? So being more open, openness to experience. So that's just, more creative, more intellectual, conscientiousness and increasing in conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and emotional stability. All of these will improve your ability. So the higher you score on each of these traits, the greater natural ability you will have to lead. An increase in emotional intelligence will also improve your leadership traits. An increase in intelligence is shown to improve leadership and also positive affect, right? So having this positive sort of emotional disposition. Negative traits will negatively impact your ability to lead. This is referred to as the dark triad. So narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Narcissism is, now the sort of best example of this would be Trump. Trump is a narcissist. And narcissism is this feeling of superiority and the constant need for admiration. Machiavellianism is this idea that you take a real sort of cynical view of people, that you think people naturally, maybe not that great. And because of that, it's okay to sort of use them in an opportunistic way to justify whatever ends that you are pursuing, right? And so this philosophy that the ends justify the means. So you can treat people poorly, you can walk all over people, you can hurt people. All of that's okay if you're doing it in the service of achieving some objective, and that this is justified because people aren't really that great anyways. That's Machiavellianism. A psychopath is someone who lacks concern for others, and they have no remorse, right? They don't feel bad when they hurt other people. And these are obviously traits that affect your ability to lead negatively. So those are the traits. There's not a lot you can do about traits. They're not going to change all that much. Behaviors are something that you can change. Now, when we talked about leadership behaviors, leadership theory has some of the same problems that motivation theory has. There's just so many different types, right? And the literature is just filled with all of these sort of infinite lists of different kinds of leadership styles, leadership approaches. So I think an effective way to sort of get a handle on all of these different leadership types is to organize them into two categories. One category is called initiate and structure. And so these are leaders that are focused on tasks. And here, this is all about getting people to perform the right tasks and to perform them effectively. The other type of leadership is referred to as consideration, and this is a focus on relationships. And it's all about establishing certain kinds of relationships that get people to voluntarily do what it is that you want them to do. And so I had highlighted 4 types of leadership behaviors. These are popular leadership approaches. They're also effective. So one is empowering, and here this is just creating the perception of psychological empowerment in others. And psychological empowerment is this belief that you have control over your work. So you want the people that you're leading to believe that they have control over what it is that they're doing. And you can do this by making their job more meaningful, by increasing, you make their job meaningful by showing how important their job is, by increasing their self-determination, right? So granting them sort of the power to direct their own future, increasing their competence. So this is all about employee development, improving their skills and progress. You want them to feel like they're moving along in their career. Another approach to leadership is ethical leadership. And this is all just about communicating and modeling ethical values, right? So you want to be an exemplar of what it means to conduct yourself in an ethical way. And of course, ethics, this is something we talked about, I believe maybe in chapter 3 or 2, maybe 3. Ethics is what determines right from wrong, right? Good from bad, right? And this is a subjective view. And so you want to communicate what the right thing to do is and what the wrong thing to do is. So you want to communicate the ethical values and you want to embody those values. You want to model them in front of others so they can see that this is something that you take seriously. And of course, you want to reward ethical behavior. Another approach is servant leadership. This is a focus on serving the interest of others and the organization over oneself, right? So your what you see is your objective as a leader is to make sure all of the people that you are leading, all of the followers, are achieving their objectives, and you're going to work hard to ensure that that happens. Transformational leadership, this is all about providing some kind of inspirational vision which encourages people to do exceptional things. Transformational leadership is typically what you would find in, let's say, politicians, right? It's all about providing some kind of inspirational vision about, how they can improve society, improve outcomes for people living in the world. So those are different types of leadership approaches. There are a lot of others, but those are the ones that sort of focus on relationships, which are important. Okay, moving right along, communication. So here, and again, I'll mention I wasn't a huge fan of this chapter. So I thought what might be valuable is to introduce a communication approach that's used by the top consultant firms in the world that communicate, give presentations and communicate with people at the highest levels of industry, at the top organizations within the world, the top, Fortune 100 companies. And so I thought that might be more valuable. So, all right, so communication process formally defined here in this model that was presented in the textbook is a sender transmitting a message to a receiver. Okay, not a lot of value in understanding that concept. But what it highlighted, what was useful is that it's an example of structure. We're going to get into exactly what structure is. But so the sender of a communication message, the goal of the sender obviously is to transmit whatever message they're transmitting. You want to do it both efficiently and effectively, right? So you want to make sure the receiver of the message understands the message, and you want to deliver that information in the least amount of time possible. You don't want to ramble on and on and on forever in trying to deliver your message. The receiver, one approach that you can take in order to be an effective receiver of information is to adopt this sort of active listening approach. And it's important because, depending on the context, obviously within teamwork, This is a way of building a positive and productive team environment. It helps build relationships, and I covered that a couple of chapters ago. So here, for the rest of this chapter, what I did was I focused on how to be an effective sender of messages, right? An effective system for communication, and I borrowed this approach from McKinsey, what McKinsey uses. And the basic idea behind the approach is to structure the message that you want to deliver in a format that's readily accessible to the way our brains naturally operate. And so to sort of clarify this, suppose you read let's say 1,000-word passage in some novel. Your brain's not going to remember all 1,000 words, right? But what it might remember is that someone got murdered, that a woman killed a man, and perhaps the weapon that was used was a gun. And that's because the way that we consume information is that your brain abstracts the information. It eliminates all of the details, and it organizes it into sort of categories which summarize the details. And then your brain just remembers the summaries. It just remembers the categories. And so, given that that's how our brain operates, then the thinking here is that in order to make understanding easier, it's probably helpful then to deliver any kind of new information already prepackaged into categories, right? And so this will save the brain from having to do the work of abstraction. You want to do the abstraction for the receiver. So that's the basic idea behind this approach. And so what structuring is organizing what you want to say, organizing all the elements of what you want to say into common categories. And it's an effective method of communication because you're leveraging your brain's need to abstract and categorize information. And so the structure that you're going to build, so the McKinsey approach has these 3 steps to it. And the first step is you want to structure your information in a pyramid structure. And the way you do that is you're going to divide each idea into its parts so that the idea is a summary of the parts, right? And so let's say the idea that you wanted to talk about was food. You might divide food into vegetables, fruit, and meat, let's say, right? And so food is the idea of food is now a summary of those 3 elements. And then you want to repeat that process for each of those elements, right? For each of those parts. So each part now becomes an idea, which then you further divide into its parts, right? And so you took food as an idea and divided into fruit, meat, and vegetables. And now you want to take fruit, right, and divide it into its parts. And so you might divide fruit into maybe apples, peaches, and pears. And so what this essentially does is it does the abstraction for the receiver so that the message is more easily understood. And so that's the whole purpose of structuring. It makes the message more easy to understand. The second aspect of this McKinsey approach is this idea of MGT, which is just an acronym. And it just means that all of the parts that you divide your ideas into, the parts must be mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Mutually exclusive means that the parts can't overlap, right? An item can only be put in one part. It cannot be put in 2 parts, right? So if your parts were hobbies, right? If your idea was a hobby and you listed a bunch of different hobbies, that's not going to be mutually exclusive because someone can have more than one hobby, right? But a fruit cannot be both a fruit and a vegetable, right? It can only belong to that one category. So you want your parts to be mutually exclusive. You also want them to be collectively exhaustive, which means when you take an idea and you break it up into its parts, you want to break it up into all its parts. You don't want to leave any parts out. And the whole purpose of doing this, right, ensuring that it conforms to this Mises structure, is because it'll ensure that the logic you're using in your arguments is both robust and sound. And then the last part of the McKinsey approach is that you want to lead with the recommendation. So the idea at the very top of your pyramid that you're going to begin your communication with is the actual bottom line of your presentation. It's the recommendation that you're going to make. So you don't want to build to that recommendation or that sort of final conclusion. You want to lead with it, right? And so if your project was, let's say, to determine whether this company should acquire some other company, when you deliver your presentation and you structure it, whatever it is that your recommendation is going to be, let's say you decide that this company should acquire that company, you're going to lead with that. That's going to be the beginning point of your presentation. At the very top of the pyramid is going to be the idea that, company X should acquire company Y. And then you want to break that down into, let's say, the three main arguments of why that's true. And then for each of those arguments, you want to break those arguments down into each of its arguments, et cetera. You want to repeat that process. So that's the McKinsey approach. And that completes chapter 15. Okay, so moving right along, that completes actually the whole lead-in process within the lead-in part of the management process. And we're now moving to the controlling part, right? And so the controlling part, so now we've motivated the workforce to effectively accomplish their tasks. And this section is really dedicated to seeing whether that's true or not, right? Whether they are actually on target to meet their objectives and on target to meet their goals, whether they are actually effectively completing their tasks. And so there was only one chapter dedicated to this section. That shouldn't indicate its importance. This is, as important as any other part. In some aspects, it's more important. But so the control process we can break down into 4 steps, right? And those steps are you want to establish targets, right? So this you'll do in the planning phase, right? So the first management process that we covered in the very beginning of the semester, right? You're going to create a plan. In this plan, you're going to have objectives, right? And so that's the very first step of the control process. You want to establish what those objectives are, right? Maybe it's, you want to increase revenue by 10% over the course of the next 6 months. And then the second step, you need to measure your performance. Well, okay, so how much revenue has revenue been increasing over the last several months? That's measuring performance, and you want to compare that performance to the target, right? So have we achieved the 10% increase or not? And then based on those results, right, based on whether you've achieved the objectives or not, or you're on target to achieve your objectives, you're going to either take corrective action, or you're going to fix what it is that you're doing, or if things are working well, you want to sort of reinforce what's working well. And one of the main ideas to this is that what you're doing is you're taking a rational approach to management decision-making. You are not relying on intuition. You are relying on concrete data, right? So decisions should be driven by data. Our goal is to increase. You don't want to say your goal is, let's increase revenue a little bit. That's not an effective way to run an organization, right? You need to be concrete with data. So you want to increase revenue by 10%. You want it to be time-based. And again, we can go back to this decision-making chapter on what an effective goal is. You want to, an example of an effective goal are SMART goals, right? So you want them to be specific, measurable. You want them to also to be time-based, right? So you want your goal to say something like, we want to increase revenue by 10% within 6 months, right? And so this is based on actual data. And then you want to, in order to determine whether you're achieving your goals or not, you want to look at your actual revenue numbers. You need to know your numbers. So that's what it means to be data-driven. And any decision that you make, any sort of process that you adopt to achieve your objectives, they should be evidence-based. You want to adopt them. You want to make a decision because the evidence suggests that that's going to give you the greatest opportunity for achieving your objectives. And so that's what sort of the control process is, taking a sort of a quant approach, sophisticated approach to the management of your organization. So there's a couple of ways in which you can do this. There's some tools that you can use. A good one is a strategy map. So a strategy map is really just sort of a dashboard which highlights the indicators that you need to be paying attention to that are important for the overall management of an organization, right? And so the strategy map then is broken up into these 4 different categories, which are categories of indicators, of data points that you need to be looking at and managing for that cover all of the important aspects of your organization. So I'll just go through each of the 4 here. All right, so one category is learning and growth goals. And an example of something like this is you want to look at how much training your employees are receiving. Are your employees aware of your company's purpose, right? These are things that you can track. Another category is internal process goals. And an example of an internal process goal would be maybe expanding your product line, introducing a new product, reducing production time. So, right, any kind of process that your organization uses in the productive process. So you want to track those processes, you want to monitor what you're doing, and you want to establish goals that your organization wants to achieve. Another category that's important, obviously, is customer goals, right? And so some of the goals that you go into track are things like increase awareness of maybe a product line, right? How aware are your customers are of some of the other things that you offer? Maybe another goal would be to lead the industry in a particular product category. So maybe you want to come out with, a healthier alternative to some food product that you offer. So that may be a goal that you set for your organization. And then, of course, financial goals. And an example of this would be the one that I've been using so far, something like a revenue goal, right? You want to increase revenue by 10% over the next 6 months. That would be an example of financial goal. Other goals are productivity goals. Now, of course, productivity, this is defined in your textbook if you're not familiar with what productivity means. Productivity is just a measure of how much output you're generating for a given level of input, right? So how much goods and services are you able to produce for a given number of employee hours, right? That would be an example of productivity, right? And so you may want to say, you want to increase productivity 5% over the next year. So that is your strategy map. Another feature of your strategy map is that there's a logic to it, which shows how one aspect impacts the others, right? And so I urge you to refer to the graphic to get a better sense of this that was provided in the lecture. But the idea here is that whatever goals you pursue within this learning and growth category, these are going to have an impact on, let's say, internal processes. Right? And the logic is obviously that if you're increasing the training, right, as a learning growth, a learning goal, if you're increasing the training of your employees, they're going to be more skilled, more competent, right? And that may enable them to more effectively produce whatever it is that you're producing, right? They may be able to produce more widgets. And that increase in production of widgets will enable you to achieve an internal process goal, right? And so all of these are connected. That's the basic idea. So again, strategy map is really just sort of this dashboard, this scoreboard, which is going to show you all of the important data points, all of the important indicators that you need to be paying attention to as a manager, which means you need to be measuring them, you need to be tracking their progress, and you need to be implementing processes that enable you to achieve whatever goals you had set for all of these different indicators. And so we'll end here. This is the last topic, total quality management. So the main idea here in total quality management, and there's lots of different approaches that you can adopt in order to achieve this idea of total quality management. Your textbook gets into a number of them. The main idea, the big takeaway for this topic is that what you want to do is you want to commit everyone in the entire organization to improve processes, right? You want to get, from the CEO to frontline, workers, everyone from the very top to the very bottom, to make a commitment and understand the importance that they need to improve what it is that they do, so you can improve the processes of the organization. And the reason why you want to improve the processes of the organization and improve everyone's ability and competencies in their tasks is because that's going to improve quality. That's going to improve the quality of whatever it is that you're producing. And you want to improve the quality because this is the best way to serve the needs of the consumer, right? And one of the most important takeaways from this, and from this chapter and really from this course, is that at the end of the day, the purpose to all of this, the purpose of organizations, the purpose of production is consumption, right? Which is to say that the whole point of this is to serve the needs of the consumer. Now, the consumer is not the only stakeholder, of course, so you don't want to serve the consumer needs, right, at the expense, let's say, of your employees, right? You want to still maintain a stakeholder approach, but it's to emphasize that the reason why we're doing this is not just to give, things for people to do. No, the point of this is that we are trying to serve the needs of the consumer. And once you fail in doing that, the organization fails because those consumers will leave you for the competition. So we operate within a competitive marketplace, which really demands this focus from organizations. And if you lack it, you will lose in the marketplace. So that ends the review. And so what I've covered here highlights some of the most important aspects of the topics that we covered in each of those chapters. Those are things that I think you should be taking away from what you learned in this course. And so that's what I'm going to test you on in the final. So study these slides that will serve you well, and good luck.